Hey friends, it's Hurley from Inklipse and welcome back to another video. Now today I'm going to be showing how to do a bunch of different techniques using background stamps because they are so versatile and there are so many different things you could do with them. And also be sure to leave me a comment down below your favorite ways to use background stamps. I cannot wait to hear from you guys down there. All the supplies are linked down below in case if you're interested, and without further ado, let's get right into the video. Alright, so for this first card, I'm going to be using the prom dress background stamp, and I love this one. It's just nice florals that are lined, and you could totally use this to color it in, but I want to show a way to use it without having to take that much time. So I'm going to put some clear sticky embossing ink on top of it, and then I feel like some people think that you always have to use the full background, but here I'm going to stamp it on a diagonal, kind of hanging off the edge of the card to create more of a focal point instead of the full background, so you can pick and choose which flowers and section you want. Then I'm going to put some Princess Gold embossing powder down and heat set that, and that's going to give it a beautiful gold shine as the focal point of the card. Now you could totally leave it like this, it's beautiful as is, but if you want to add a little bit more detail, I'm going in with the Clear Skies Hurley Create ink pad, and I'm going to spray that down and turn it into a watercolor. And then I'm just dipping the card in to give it a little bit of texture and color in the background. You could totally do this with ink blending too, to give it a little bit of texture. Now I'm going to finish it off with the sentiment from the Flower Picking Friends stamp set, and I like to just go in with my acetate sheet and kind of figure out which sentiment fits best there from the set. And I decided on just a simple hello, and I heat embossed that in Princess Gold as well. But I just love how simple this is and how easily you can make lots of these cards without having to color it in, but it looks so elegant. Now for this next card, I'm going to be using the same prom dress background stamp, but this time I'm stamping down the whole background. So I'm going to use some clear sticky embossing ink and stamp it down onto a sheet of stark white cardstock again. I'm going to give it good pressure all around to make sure the whole image stamps. And then I'm going to do some clear heat embossing. And heat embossing is just a really great way to get a resist on your card, whether you want to watercolor this in or do some ink blending. It just acts as a good barrier for the color. So then I'm going to heat set that until it turns nice and clear. And then I also feel like some people think that you have to use the full background like I was kind of talking about, but here I went in and cut out the images individually. This is pretty simple to do, and on this background stamp there's different flowers, and I cut out 3 of the larger flowers and leaves to use as focal points on my card. Now I do have background stamps called the peel aparts that actually have little pieces that peel apart, and I'll share that later in the video. But even if it's just a full background, you can still get out little pieces like this for the focal, and it's pretty simple to do. Now you could totally watercolor these in, but I love to do some ink blending, and that for me is a little bit easier than watercolor. So here I just went in with a variety of shades of my ink pads and went in with the mini and detail blending tools to go in and do some shading. So I started off with Piggyback, I went in with a little bit of Guppy around the edges, and then I'm going in on each petal and adding just a little bit of Bee Sting. And these detail blending tools are a huge lifesaver when you're doing this, because you can get into much smaller spaces than you can with the round blending tools. And I also get into tighter spaces with the round blending tools by just using the edge of it as well. And here I'll go in and fill in the leaves as well with several colors. Now I wanted to show all these different flowers, there's only 3 of them, but I wanted to show the different color combinations you can use. I find my inks are pretty forgiving and you can add lots of different colors down. Here I went in with a little bit of Piggyback, then I went in with Clear Skies and some Crown Me for the color of the flowers. And you can see I just use the edge of the blending tool when I'm going around edges of the flowers or things like that. And this just adds a nice detailed shading. Like I said, you could totally go in and watercolor these in, but I love how effortlessly this ink blends together without having to go in with any water or mediums like that. I'm going to then go in with the leaves again and do that and just ink blend those together. Now you could totally cut the leaves separately and do those separate if you find that that's easier for you, but it was pretty easy for me to get into the little details with the blending tools on the edge here. Then for the background of the card, I'm going to go in with some Woof ink on a perfect gray card base, and I'm just going to do some ink blending using the Lou Stencil. Now I focused most of the color in the center here, and then I kind of blended it out to the edge, and this gives a nice soft background or interest in the background without taking away from the flowers. I'm going to peel this up so you get that really awesome tone-on-tone look, and then I'm going to start adhering the flowers down. I started off with this flower here, and I adhered it flat onto my card, and then I did some kind of stair-stepping with foam tape and did the other flowers at different levels. Once this card is all complete, I love how it looks. I love just using certain parts of the images and ink blending to create a really beautiful and elegant card in the end. Kind of spotlighting some of those flowers, which is really fun. For the next card, I'm going to be showing how to use this Watercolor Blooms Peel Apart background stamp to get a cool two-toned effect. And I've shared lots of ways to use this, but this is just one simple way to use it. So these background stamps are pretty cool because they have lots of different sections that peel apart. So here you can see all the little flowers that come out, and it's almost like getting a whole nother stamp set with your background stamp, or you could piece it all together and use the whole thing as one. Now here I've just lined it up in my MISTI stamping tool without those little puzzle pieces in there, and then I'm going to stamp down this first layer using the Crown Me purple ink pad. And I'm just going to add a little bit of water down onto there too, so it gives a kind of cool watercolor effect. Now I'm going to swing that over and stamp it down onto my stark white cardstock here, give it some good pressure to make sure it all stamps, and then I'll open that back up. So this gives you little areas that aren't filled in there, and you could totally put sentiments or whatever you want there, but I'm going to fill it up with the other images in a different tone of ink. So to do this, I'm just taking those other stamped images and putting them right back into that stamp. They fit just perfectly in there like a puzzle. And then I'm going to remove the larger portion of the stamp. So I'm just pushing down on those areas where they're kind of cut out to make sure that it all sticks down onto my MISTI lid and stays in place exactly where it needs to be. Now mine had a little bit of trouble staying since I sprayed some water on there, so maybe kind of skip that step if you're doing this puzzle piece here. And I'm going to stamp the second layer down with the Prom Queen ink pad. This is a really beautiful pink color, and again I'll spray it down with a little bit of water to get a cool watercolor effect in the end. Once I've stamped that down, it'll kind of fill in those other areas, and it gives you this super cool two-toned effect when you're done stamping, which I just love that background. It creates a really cool look, but like I said, this is just one of the ideas using this background stamp. Then I'm going in and I'm just going to cut down the card kind of around some of those flowers to make it so that half the background is the flowers, and then we can add our own background in on the card. So this will be kind of the focal point popped up. I think that going around some of these backgrounds makes it less of a background and more of a focal point. So then to finish off the other part of our background, I'm going to do kind of a tone-on-tone look using the Jewel Heist background stamp. Here I took a perfect gray card base and stamped it down with some woof ink, and it gives you a cool tone-on-tone look. I got some questions on how to do a background that doesn't really stand out against some colorful background, and this is a great way to do it. So if you want more of a subtle look, just do a tone-on-tone stamped look, and that will give you a really great effect of texture in the background without taking away from the main focal point of the image. And I went in clear heat embossed that too for just a little bit of shine. Now I finished it off with a sentiment from the Doodle floral stamp set that says, "Thank you for your kindness." I stamped this down in some clear sticky ink onto some black cardstock and white heat embossed that for a little bit of contrast. And that just stood out on my card beautifully and kind of stood out against all those beautiful colors that we stamped it down in. So here's that finished card once we were complete. I love the two-toned effect with that Watercolor Blooms background stamp and the little Jewel Heist details in the background. Now for this next one, I'm using the Jewel Heist background stamp again, but I'm going to do a full background with this stamp. So I've inked it up with some clear sticky embossing ink, and I'm going to stamp it down onto a piece of stark white cardstock, just making sure I give good pressure all around to make sure it all stamps. Then I'm sprinkling on some clear embossing powder, and I'm going to heat set that until it turns nice and clear and turns into a resist here. Once that was finished, I went in and did some ink blending here. I started off with Psych in the center, went to Later Gator, Tropical Tango, and Clear Skies. So it's a mix of greens and blues, and it fades out to kind of a darker teal on the edge, which I thought was really awesome. But like always, play around with my inks. They have lots of fun different colors, and I blend together kind of the most random colors that aren't supposed to really work, but they do, and it has a hard time creating brown, which is really awesome. So play around with different color combinations and have fun creating backgrounds. It's one of my favorite things to do with background stamps and my inks together to create this cool resist pattern. So I really loved this background once I was finished blending it, so you could totally leave it just as it is. I like how it's done like this. I wiped off any of the excess ink from the embossing, and here's that background in the end. However, I wanted to go in and create kind of a fun pattern with these inks. So I went in and I started cutting it out. Now I used these big scissors from Tonic and Holtz. This kind of saves some time as I'm cutting because they cover so much surface area, and I'm only cutting out really simple shapes. I wanted to create this pattern with kind of random clusters of these. I only chose, a few here and there, so leaving lots of white space still in this pattern. I'm just going to go in and cut these out, and since there are certain colors of inks in certain areas, after I cut it out, I placed it back to how it was right on my desk, so I knew exactly how it was going to puzzle back together when I was putting it onto my card and adhering it all together. So I'm just cutting out, like I said, different clusters. It was super easy to do. It looks like it would be time consuming, but since they were just little diamonds, it's pretty simple. Then I went in with Woof ink, and I'm just going to ink up my background again, and then I'm going to stamp it down onto a piece of scrap cardstock, and then I can stamp it down onto my actual cardstock. Now here I'm stamping it down onto a scrap because I want a lighter version of my ink pad. So if you ever want to get a lighter version of your ink, just stamp it off onto a scrap first, and then stamp it onto your actual cardstock, and you'll get a second generation kind of lighter version of that. So once that's complete, I can then go in with all those little pieces and take a piece of foam tape behind each one to add a little bit of dimension and then adhere them all together. And since I have that pattern stamped onto my card and also have them kind of puzzled already on the side there, it was very easy and not very time consuming to just go in here and adhere it all together into that pattern that I had. Now I definitely wouldn't make a ton of these cards, but for somebody special, this is a really awesome card, and I love kind of spotlighting the certain sections in the pattern and creating your own design in the end. It turned out really cool and super dimensional once I was finished. So I just finished off adding all those pieces onto there. I love how it looks in the end. And then I'm just going to add a little sentiment from the Doodle floral stamp set that says, "You make me smile." And I love how this one turned out with the ink blending and cutting that background apart to make your own cool dimensional design. Alright, I hope you guys really enjoyed this video showing tons of my favorite techniques using background stamps. If you enjoyed it, please give it a big thumbs up, and be sure to hit that subscribe button down below so you never miss more card making videos like this one from me. I'll see you guys very soon for another card making and crafting video. Have a great day. Bye!